Today on Styrene Modeler's Haven.
The Shelf of Doom strikes back.
That's okay, we'll beat it again with this BF110 build. Let's do this. Back before I had a YouTube channel, I started this Revell 148 scale BF110. I was throwing so much resin and photo etch at this build that I finally lost my mojo halfway through the build and threw it on the Shelf of Doom. In completing another Shelf of Doom build, this Trumpeter SAM6 carrier, you can watch both parts of that build. I got my mojo back and it was time to get back to the BF110. I wanted to make a more realistic looking jump seat for the navigator's position. I started by making a wire frame using the kit piece as a template. I then cut strips of foil, wove them together using tape to keep everything nice and neat, glued the frame to the foil and then cut away the excess foil, and voila! A much better looking jump seat compared to the kit part. With that out of the way, let's get to painting the cockpit. Being an older kit, I was actually surprised as to how detailed the cockpit parts were. Since I was going to position the canopy open, I wanted to be able to bring out as many of these details as possible. I started by painting all the parts black to create a black base, making sure to give even and thorough coverage on all the parts. I then went in with some white paint and applied highlights in different points of the parts to bring out some of the detail. Using a German cockpit gray of the era, I applied it in light thin coats so that some of that white highlighting would show through the base color. This creates a nice starting point that brings out some of the detail with the previous highlights and gives you a good base to further enhance the detail. Using an array of colors, I went back in with the brush and picked out all the finer details in the cockpit. To protect all my hard work up to this point, I went ahead and shot everything with a clear gloss coat. Making a homebrew mixture of a dark brown wash using standard oil paints, I went ahead and applied an oil wash over the entire cockpit parts. The oil wash creates nice shadow effects in some of the deeper recesses of the details in the cockpit, and it also adds a little bit of a grimy look to the entire surface. Next, using a mixture of black and white oil paints to make a light gray, I went in and highlighted further some of the details throughout the cockpit. This is accomplished by putting in small dabs of the oil paint into the area and then blending it into that surrounding area to create a nice highlighted effect. Finally, I hit everything with a matte clear coat, which allowed me to use acrylic paint to dry brush and highlight some of the details with lighter shades of gray paint. And there we have it, a nicely detailed cockpit, which hopefully once put into the fuselage, you'll still be able to see a lot of this great detail. Like many older kits, this one did pose some challenges. There were a lot of ugly gaps and seams that I had to tackle and clean up. It also didn't help that I threw a bunch of resin at it, further complicating the problem. But using my tried and true process of filling seams and gaps, I was able to get everything smoothed out and ready for primer. You can watch a how-to video on how I filled seams and gaps that avoids shrinkage and cracking. You'll find a link in the description. Priming a model. I kinda like this part. It allows everything to blend in together so I can see the model start to take shape. Nothing fancy here, just using my favorite Style & Res gray primer as it lays down thin, flat, and with a hairdryer, dries quick. And if you want the full details of how I like to prime my models, I've got a full video on that very subject, link in the description. With the primer down, all the small flaws fixed, corrected, and re-primed, it's now time for one of my favorite parts, applying camo. Whoops, I got a little bit ahead of myself. First we got to get the canopy on. I want to show off all that great cockpit detail, so I'm going to set up this model with an open canopy. A little cleanup here, some sanding there, lots of test fitting, and with the canopy pieces ready, a dip in future. While waiting for the canopy parts to dry, I gotta put in the last remaining bits and pieces into the cockpit before it gets all closed up. With all the remaining little bits and pieces installed in the cockpit, painted and detailed, I can now move on to masking the canopy and getting that installed as well. Whew, with a greenhouse canopy like this is going to take a few sessions at the bench. I had some pre-cut masks that came with the kit, but they weren't cut very well. I used the ones that fit well, or well enough, and then using a variety of metal templates, just went in and cut my own masks with Tamiya tape. And since I was going to position this canopy open, I had to mask some of the parts both on the outside and on the inside so I could paint both sides. The small bits never seemed to end for the cockpit. There were a few remaining bits and pieces that I had to paint, detail, and glue to the inside of the canopy before affixing it to the model. Finally, we can get this canopy on so we can move on to the camo. Slowly, careful, nicely done. I like using Tamiya thin cement whenever possible to apply the canopy. Applied lightly, the cement through capillary action will spread and pull under the canopy without creeping up the side of it. Of course, this only works if the two mating surfaces are made of plastic. With the canopies attached, stuff a little foam in the cavities, hit the canopy with the interior color on the outside so it shows through, and we got to paint those pieces both on the inside and outside that are going to be positioned open. And finally, mixing a little bit of dark gray acrylic paint into the filler, we can fill those gaps around the canopy. Man, that was quite an operation. Now we can get to the camo. I really liked the box art that came with the kit and decided to go with that paint scheme. But before putting down any color, I wanted to break up the surface by putting down shadows and highlights very similar to the way we did the cockpit. The first thing I did was wet sand the entire model with 6000 grit sandpaper. The primer left a little bit of a texture that I wanted to get rid of before applying the black base. With that out of the way, we can now hit the entire model and all the small parts with a flat black color. With the black drying, it's time to go in with white and pick out all the panels one by one, taking my time and applying the white slowly and carefully. The idea here isn't for perfection, it's just to get a kind of mottled effect while picking out the panels and keeping some of the black paint showing through between the panels to create the shadows. Not only will this help create shadows and highlights, but this also breaks up some of the monotony of the camo color that will later go down. Also, by controlling the saturation of the different camo colors, I'm able to sometimes even create a faded, patchy look to the paint. With all the other techniques and weathering that we'll do later, it really helps make this model pop and look interesting. Alright, now we're starting with the colors of the camo. Always working from lightest to darkest, we start with the bottom of the aircraft. With the paint thinned 70%, thinner to paint, and the PSI set somewhere between 10 and 12, I slowly apply the paint layer by layer. This allows me to control the saturation of the paint so I don't cover up those highlights. Before applying the second darkest color, using the kit instructions, I take a pencil and a ruler and lightly scribe out the camo pattern. With the camo pattern penciled out, I can now apply the second color and paint between the lines. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as I go close up to the line or even a little bit over, that's okay. This just gives me a reference of where I need to apply the second color. Again, with very thin paint and low PSI, I apply the layers slowly so that I can allow some of those highlights to show through. Since this is going to be a splinter camo with a hard edge between the two colors, before I can apply the darkest color, I need to mask off the areas I've already painted. So following the pencil lines that I drew in previously, I make sure to mask off at those edges while allowing that pencil line to be on the part that's going to be painted in the darkest color. This way the pencil line disappears when I apply the paint. And just like before, thin paint, low PSI, slowly applying the layers and allowing the highlights to show through. Before getting to the modeling of the camo, I need to go in and clean up some of the overspray that got onto the lightest of the three colors. In order to do that, I gotta protect my previous work by masking it off. And with a steady hand, thin paint at low PSI, I can even out that line between the splinter camo and the sides of the fuselage. Since I'm going to be freehanding the modeled effect of the camo, I want to first practice and dial in my technique by doing it on a junk piece. Once I feel confident and using the box art as a frame of reference, I go ahead and dive in. The idea here is to take my time, keep checking my work, and have fun with the process. With the first pass complete and satisfied with the results, I switch the color in my airbrush and go back in with the second color, taking my time and try to make it look as random as possible. Hey, alright! That's not half bad. First it was mask, 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 but now we get to the fun part of demasking and finally get to see the results of all that hard work. For only being the second time I've done this type of modeled camo scheme, I'll take it. And we're back to masking. I still got to do some of the other detail painting, things like the fuselage band, wheel wells, wheels, flaps, slats, and on and on and on. But hey, that's part of the fun of building models. With the majority of the paintwork done, it's time to seal in all that work so we don't mess it up when applying the decals. Also, the gloss clear coat will give a nice smooth finish for the decals to stick to avoid any silvering. Shattered decals. Well, with the decal sheet this old, probably pushing 30 plus years, I can't get too upset. I tried to apply a gloss clear coat over the decal sheet to see if I can save it, but after hitting it with water again, same thing. I did an entire video with tips and tricks on trying to save an old decal sheet. I put a link in the description. It's time to pull out the spares and see if I can cobble together all the decals and markings I'm going to need. Luckily, I was able to cobble together all the decals I would need except for the fuselage letters. That was simple enough. I went ahead and cut those out with my vinyl cutter and decided to just paint those on. Masked up, squirt some paint, done. Now with my hodgepodge of decals that I was able to put together from all my spares, I carefully take my time to place them and with my favorite setting solution, get them to snuggle down. After getting all the iron crosses on the top of the wings, on the bottom of the wings, fuselage, I move on to some of the smaller decals to round this off. With all the decals placed and everything looking like it should, it's time to hit the model with another coat of gloss clear to seal in those decals and protect them from all the weathering I'm about to do. With the model starting to take shape and look like a German aircraft from World War II, it's time to start the weathering. We start with one of the easiest weathering techniques, a simple oil pin wash. Using a dark brown pin wash mixed from oil paints and thinner, I start to apply it into all the recessed panel lines. After letting the pin wash dry for a little while, I take a rag slightly dampened in paint thinner and wipe away the excess. The dark brown pin wash really makes all those details pop without being too harsh. You can watch a detailed video I did on this entire process, and you know where to find the link, down in the description. I repeat this process across the entire aircraft and further clean up the pin wash and enhance the detail by using a little bit of thinner on a fine paintbrush. And to even out the uneven finish left by doing the pin wash, I hit the entire model with a coat of a matte clear finish. It's time to get all the bits and bobs on the model, and I start with the exhaust. To give the exhaust a convincing weathered look, I start by painting the exhaust stacks a rusty red-brown color. I follow that up with a metallic burnt iron, and just by using these two colors, I get a very convincing weathered exhaust stack. In a previous video I made, and before I painted these exhaust stacks, I actually drilled them out to give them a more realistic look. You can get that video by clicking the link in the description. We're getting close here, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel on this build. It's down to all the little details that complete this model. It's getting really exciting now, and I'm trying to do everything I can not to rush. A couple of other techniques I wanted to do on this model to round off the weathering was to first do some exhaust stains. I applied the exhaust stains in 3 different stages with 3 different colors using my airbrush. I wanted to depict that the fuel being used on this aircraft was heavy in lead, so it wouldn't be a black sooty color exhaust stain, but more of a grayish to undertone to it. To enhance a little bit of the details on the tires, I dry brushed the raised lettering with a little bit of a medium gray paint. Using weathering powders, I further detailed and weathered the tires by giving them the "it's been down the runway" look. And like some of the other techniques, I have full detailed videos on how to do exhaust stains and weather your tires with weathering powders. Links are in the description. In the same way I dry brushed the raised lettering on the tires, I used the same technique to dry brush the landing gear and wheel wells to further enhance those details. And finally, we can remove the last of the masking that's still on this model off the canopy. By carefully picking away at all the masking tape, we reveal that beautiful greenhouse canopy. We can't forget the smaller canopy parts that are going to be positioned open. And with all the masking removed, I can go back in with a little bit of interior color and touch up the edges of the canopy. Pop on a couple of propellers, a little bit of final touch-up paint, a little doodad over here, a little bit over there, and by carefully, slowly taking my time, I can position all those canopy parts open. Not only can we see that great cockpit detail with all the canopy parts open, but it adds to a lot of visual interest by seeing exactly how this worked on this aircraft. This build languished on the shelf of doom for several years, and I'm glad I was able to find my mojo, bring it back to the bench, and get it completed. And with that, my modeling friends, the Revell 148 scale BF110. Thanks for joining me and watching how this build came together. I hope you've been able to take away some tips and tricks from this build that'll inspire you on your next build. Drop a comment to share your tips and tricks and let me know what you thought of the video. Subscribe to my channel and like this video to keep up with my latest content. Were there any products in this video that you'd like to get your hands on? I put links in the description of the products used in this video. If you click those links and make a purchase, I get paid a commission by the seller at no cost to you. Thank you. Check out my other videos, including a full build of a B-17 bomber. Thanks for watching.